Hello and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Show. My name is Lauren Risley and I'm going to be your host for this episode. I'll level with you here. Usually when I start these shows I have something written down, an idea, a concept of a very poor joke that I'd like to use to initiate the rest of the show. Some very tenuous link to get you tantalised and intrigued for the rest of the show, because my average view time is 2 minutes and 43 seconds, which means that for at least that first little bit, I've got your attention. This episode, I'm afraid to say, I've fallen woefully short in that respect, because I have nothing for you, except for one tiny small admission, which is that this is perhaps the first time since I started reviewing indie games that I'm going to do games back to back that I'm going to wholeheartedly recommend, because the game I'm reviewing today, I tweeted within about 30 seconds of booting the thing up that I loved it. And I'm really happy to report that after all of that experience, I still feel very much the same. Gorytale. Now I'll get to the notes in just a second, but just to give you an idea as to why I love this game so much. I preach two things when I look for good games. Number one, is the game fun? Am I going to want to play it when I stop, when I quit for the night, when I have to quit, when I go back from lunch to my work desk? Am I going to be thinking about the game? Am I going to be thinking about what's next? How am I going to approach it? Am I looking forward to any aspect of the game? This game hits that one right on the head. And secondly, does the game feel like it's got passion? Does it at least have the nub of a good idea? I don't expect every single game to have a completely original concept. That's nigh impossible these days. But can you give the genre, the title, or indeed just this type of game your own twist? And again, this game manages to do that. So let's get into the nitty-gritty notes, shall we? Gorytale is a fast-paced, adrenaline-rushed FPS shooter set in Candyland that is so damn sweet it could be someone's hell. Gorytale features a cheesy storyline where players take on the role of an unnamed protagonist who wasn't really the nicest guy while living, and fortunately for him, his death sends him to his own personal version of hell, survive the upcoming hordes of painfully adorable enemies, and viciously ravage their lands. The game features include indescribably adorable characters and environment, ridiculously excessive levels of violence, absurd weapons, cheesy story, lots of one-liners, and banal music. If you happen to enjoy Duke Nukem, Serious Sam, Doob, and Quake types of games and enjoy cheesy humor, Gorytale is for you. Publisher describes it as an action, gore, indie, violent type game. The publisher is the developer is also the release date is the 19th of July, so it's been out for a couple of weeks, and it's currently retailing in the UK for £4.79 or $6 in America. Right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of it, shall we? Why would you play this game over other FPS games? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, yes, it's an indie title, and there's a lot of rough edges to this game. I'm not going to lie to you. When I first picked up the game and when I first started playing it, it's immediate very, very quickly that there's not a tremendous amount of polish overall to the aesthetics of the game. It's very basic in design, it's very linear in nature, there's not a lot of shading, there's quite a lot of very flat panels, and the aesthetic is very cheesy. That's enough to put most people off from the get-go, because the quality of the game doesn't necessarily have the 100% finish that perhaps other indie titles may have. But that's only on the surface. What you need to do is you need to get involved further. You need to have a look at the gameplay, because trust me, even just browsing the menus of this game will give you a very, very clear idea of the type of experience that you're going to have, which is that it's over-the-top, goofy fun. So again, I'm going to have to ignore you while I refer to my notes this time. This isn't what the developer has said. The story, Gorytale guy is standing at the pearly gates when he is denied access to heaven and is instead sent to hell. However, despite him loving the prospect of going to a violence-soaked, action-packed sea of debauchery and chaos, the attendant states hell is subjective, and he will be sent to his own personal version of it. Imagine if Hello Kitty designed the circles of hell, and you get the basic gist. Everything is cute, cuddly, and wants to be your friend. Oh, friend. And is utterly terrifying. Now, Gorytale guy has to battle through hell. See, I can't even write synopses. Why do I give developers so much shit for not being able to write them? I can't even read them, let alone write them. To escape by taking out all enemies on every single level, beating the bosses, and making it to the portal at the end, pushing the big red button to nuke hell itself. Granted, the story is not going to rival Citizen Kane in terms of the long-time memorable stuff. I get that, but at the same time, what people forget is that a lot of the times with gaming, that when I criticize a game for not having a story or a narrative, it's literally because they have the mechanics figured out, they may even have the look figured out, but they don't give me the why. Most pro wrestling fans and even most sports fans will tell you that the only time that they ever really start investing in people, sports people or characters, is when I know the why. I can know the what, I can know that you're an amazing athlete, I can know you've done things that you've never done, I can know that you used to play for this team or that you used to wrestle this person or whatever, but without the why, without the emotional investment, it kind of all amounts to nothing. And a lot of games fall short in that respect. They don't capture the imagination or they don't capture the essence of what gaming is, which is creating moments. When I first booted up this game and I was greeted with such you can get the thumbnail of the game was a little bit misleading because it's cartoony. Obviously this game doesn't have a cartoon aesthetic, but it is very light, bright and brash and over the top cheerful. And that throws you at first. But then you notice that the thing's got a severed figure for a bloody pointing reticule, and again it clues you into the kind of gaming experience you're going to have. But the story is enough to facilitate you moving forward. It's got 3 levels, effectively. 3 levels of hell, I should say, and the idea is that you just have to traverse each level, murdering everything that tries to hug you, and then get to the end, beating the boss, which is a challenge in of itself, and then going through a portal to ascend to another level of hell to eventually get to the end. I completed it recently, and I must admit, I wasn't expecting there to be much of a payoff with this game, considering the fact that you are greeted with an opening cutscene of meeting, I don't think it's St. Peter, but it might be, I don't know, and then he sends you to hell. At that point, you don't really get a lot of narrative in the game. You make your way through the levels, and apart from that initial scene, you don't really get a lot of narrative for the rest of the game. You just kind of plod on murdering things. But then at the end of the game, once you complete it, you get the satisfaction of being able to actually press a giant red button that nukes hell, and the graphic for that, even with the game's graphical limitations, looks pretty dope-tastic. And then you meet St. Peter again, who's surprised to see you, and you go, yeah, hell was too easy. And he responds by saying, okay, we'll just send you another one. Yeah, looks like I'm going to hell, double hell.
Do you know what nemesis means?
Now again, corny. The idea that there's like more than one hell. Sorry, there's not hell and it's this terrible punishment. It's like, okay, we put you in sort of little hell and we'll see if that's enough for you. Okay, well the next one we'll put you in proper super duper hell this time. No funsies here. Cool. I actually kind of like the fact that they're reveling in the silliness of it all. It's not taking itself too seriously from the perspective of wanting to be a hardcore first-person shooter. It's comedy for the sake of comedy a lot of the time. I mean, just to refer back to my notes for a second, the kinds of levels you're going to have are Candyland, where everything is literally looks like it's delicious and edible. So marshmallows and candy canes and giant sweet wrappers and lollipops and cookies and things of that nature. You have a second level, which is kind of the same designs to a certain degree, albeit the color schemes and hues are a little bit different. And then you've got the third level, which is Mexican inspired. So it's all Mexican food and it's all Latino inspired, I imagine. I must be honest, when I first played through that, I wasn't 100% sure it wasn't racist, given that I get Mexican people like Mexican food, but I'm pretty sure they don't put sombreros on everything they own.
Hey, I doubt it.
Okay.
But anyway, mild social stigma aside, let's talk about the enemies for a second, because this is where the game is going to take up most of your time. So, here are the types of enemies you're going to be facing. Marshmallows that hug you, cupcakes that hug you, lattes that shoot foam from a distance. There's no sexual innuendo there and you're disgusting for thinking it. Donuts that hop towards you, turn to the side and roll towards your ass, killing you in one hit in certain instances. You've got bananas that throw smaller bananas, and again, I don't really want to know where he gets those from. You've also got chilies that explode, the dicks. Tiny little taco shells that again hug you, hot sauces that burp hot sauce at you, and little cheese slices that leave fart trails in their wake. You've got basically a bunch of Zerg rush enemies. Now this could be annoying to some gamers. The AI here is not what you would call the most sophisticated. The gameplay of this game is going to be focused on really one thing, running and gunning. It's first person and there's not a lot of stealth elements to this game. So when an enemy sees you, they're not going to be tricked into thinking, oh, was that him? I have no idea. No, they're coming for your ass. And they're coming in numbers. There's several points of this game where you'll traverse the levels and you will end up in sections, not necessarily the arena, which we'll talk about in a minute as well, but just parts of the level where you'll be overwhelmed. You'll be forced to backtrack. You'll be forced to remember the way you came in order to be able to adequately defend yourself against the oncoming hordes. And trust me, when you're up against 20, 30, 40, 50 of the smiling it might not seem scary at first, but there's no doubt in my mind that every single time I came across a situation armed with maybe 1 or 2 shots on my shotgun or assault rifle that I forgot to reload, I didn't immediately
Let's be friends.
You know you're in for a bad time, and that's where the fun of this game I think really sets in, because this game doesn't feel cheap even with the numbers advantage because the AI is so simple. You can exploit the fact that you know they're going to be charging at you, so you can follow them if you need to. You can circle them around if you need to. If you need to gain a height advantage by gaining distance and then being able to leverage that into a superior shooting position, or to be able to gun down more of them simultaneously, you can do that. But let's talk about the platforming elements. We'll be able to talk about the combat more in just a second. The platforming elements, that's where this game maybe could use some improvement. In the first level, I noticed that there was several platforms that you have to jump across, and there's a big pit at the bottom with loads of enemies in. Because guess what happened there? Anyway, the first time I tried it, it was a bit awkward. I thought I just undershot it. Turns out I overshot it in anything. Basically, the jump mechanic is just a little bit loose and a little bit vague. Luckily, it's the only time in the game where it's really relevant. It introduces this platform element but doesn't really expand on it. There's not a lot of these sections in the game. You're not going to come across them very often, but nevertheless, that first level, you're still new to the game, so you would expect it to be a little bit more forgiving to you. I know it's hell, but at the same time, come on now, I'm a paying customer. You've got to let me enjoy the game for a little bit. But anyway, nevertheless, you kind of get to the edge, you press the button, and it looks like you're not going to make it because you keep pressing it too early. You almost have to, you feel like you're already in the air when you press the jump button, and that just feels a little vague. You don't really use the jump apart from these platforming sections. To be honest with you, you can use it to gain some height, to be able to get over certain parts of the map in order to escape when the hordes are coming for you. But even then, you don't use it all that often. So it's not the biggest complaint in the world, but considering that the game does introduce these platform elements, I got stuck on this bit several times. I had to circle around, which is where I noticed that the game does have a respawn exploit at that particular point of the level, which is balanced out by the fact that there's not many enemies that drop too many things, so you can't abuse it to beat the game more easily. At least I don't think you can. But nevertheless, there is a multi-respawn. And the other part of the platforming that's worth mentioning is in some of the arenas and in the second stage of the levels, there are these little gummy drop things that you can use to bounce up. And this is a nice touch. It was the first thing that I noticed in the first arena that I really wished were there. These things to allow you to gain distance and be able to escape enemies more easily while also not completely disengaging you from the battle. The other thing that would have been nice in this respect in these arena sections, same with the gummy bear things, is that the game has portals, the way you escape the levels of hell. It would have been nice to have portals from one side of the map to the other and vice versa, or just randomized so you don't know where you're going to come out. It would just make the gameplay element just a bit more unpredictable. It would mean that you could potentially think you're getting away from hordes of enemies because they've hauled you in, to then cycle behind them and catch them by surprise, spring a trap or something. Or you might be thinking, hell, I'm just going to sneak in here and hopefully pop out there to get some ammo or something, and it drops you right into the middle of it. It would be a nice little, kind of like the Wabberjack from Skyrim, just you don't know what you're going to get, but it adds to the fun factor. But just before I forget talking about the enemies for a second, I must be honest, they're very much bullet sponges. You're not going to find a tremendous amount of diversity in the way that they interact with you. The only real difference is, again, some of the larger enemies like the lattes and the bananas that physically throw things at you, so you have to mind your distance. And of course the chili kamikaze things, which are just the most annoying thing in the world, because not only do they kill you in 2 hits, so only 2 of them have to gang up on you, and usually they're the quickest things in the entire game. So if you hear them before you see them, the chances are they're going to get you. But nevertheless, The idea is that they will all rush you simultaneously, and so long as you're clever, you can outsmart them, and you can pick off enemies in order to thin the herd to focus on the larger enemies. The larger enemies will tend to be a bit slower. So long as you can cycle through your weapons and keep your ammo supply healthy, this game isn't going to prove too much of a challenge for you. That is until you get to the bosses. Now, again, not the most complex bosses in the world. You've got three. You've got a giant marshmallow called Little Mellow, I think. You've got a giant cupcake. And you've got a giant corn on the cob. And they all function much the same way in the sense that you just got to destroy them. You just got to keep shooting them until they come down. They have big health bars that pop up at the end of arena levels, which are basically just giant Quake missions where you've just got to kill hundreds of hordes. I think it goes 200, 250, and 300, which sound like Herculean tasks. And at least at first it is. The first level is very, very difficult with only the shotgun and only the assault rifle at your beck and call, but we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But nevertheless, these arena levels are fun the first time. Here's the other problem with this game. The quick save, the auto save mechanic, it's good. I like it. It helps, it makes the game feel like you're making progress as you play without necessarily having any progression bars. The only problem with this is when you get to a arena level, that's where you save. Now let's say you beat the arena part of that level and then you're confronted with the boss. So not only do you have no bullets, no health, no ammo, no nothing, and you have to restock from all the stuff, all the enemies then disappear and the new little ones regenerate along with the boss. Let's say for the sake of argument you die. You then have to do the arena part again and then face the boss. Now, this might not seem annoying, but when they can corner you, and when all it takes is a couple of times where a couple of them might give you a hug, one of them might explode, one of them might shoot you with something, and suddenly you're down to about 75 health. It's difficult to gauge because it's the old school GoldenEye where it just sort of tells you where you're taking damage. It doesn't give you an overall indication apart from the screen turning from colourful to grey and white, which is fine, but it's not the most accurate representation of what we're talking about here. It's a pain because then you have to replay that whole section again. You then have to grind through the boss. The first two are worse for this than the last boss. I've got to be honest, the last boss I actually found easier because I had more access to weapons and things of that nature. But those first two, yeah, get used to being ground into dust by these levels. But I don't want to rag on them too much because they are fun. The levels are well designed. They're open and sparse. So long as you're not stupid, you can outrun and outgun most of these enemies, and then the bosses die. They give you a nice big deposit of coins, which is the currency in this game, which you use to buy upgrades and things of that nature for the guns. It's okay. It's just that quick save. If I was designing it, I would have moved the quick save after that section just so you've got the ability to crack on with the game. And more to the point, if you want an excuse to replay the arena levels, they're in the main menu. They're a separate mode altogether. You can just replay the arenas to beat other players that have high scores. I think some of the high scores at the moment are like 3,000, 4,000 kills, staying alive for 5 to 10 minutes at a time. I think I'm ranked about 17 at the moment with a 3.5 minute and like 300 kills, something like that. So if you want a competitive element within the arenas, you've got that in the main menu. You don't need that in the story missions, and it just protracted the story a little bit longer than I would have liked. So let's talk about the weapons, shall we? The weapons. So you've got hands, of course. You've got a fish. That's cool. The shotgun, the machine gun, the trumpet, which is exactly what it sounds, the buzzsaw, the cannon, the toaster, which again is exactly as it sounds, and an RPG. All the weapons have their uses. For instance, the shotgun is good for taking down the bigger enemies in one hit or two hits. The machine gun is good in taking out the smaller enemies and thinning out the herd a little bit more. The toaster is great because you just throw it and it just blows up and destroys people. You've got the cannon, which is good for clearing a path, especially if you're going to be charging through enemies to get through space and you're not sure if you're going to be able to take all of the ones out in your way. The cannon's a good thing for that. The other one is the RPG, which I didn't like the hit detection on the RPG. It doesn't have an area of an effect. It literally takes out a few of them if it comes into contact with them. It's just a little bit imbalanced, but nevertheless more powerful than the shotgun and good for taking down the bosses. Now I will admit, in my playthrough, I only ever really relied on the machine gun and the shotgun. I did start to lean more heavily on the toaster and the RPG in the later levels. The trumpet and the buzzsaw, I just didn't see the use of, and I never used the melee. The reason for this is because, of course, because you've got so many enemies to worry about, you can't run the risk of using melee, because if you take one enemy out, 10 are going to be on you. It's the same story with the buzzsaw. It can be useful if you run out of bullets, but I never did. I was pretty conservative with my ammo. I cycled my weapons. And the trumpet does damage to you as you use it. I mean, it's a powerful gun, don't get me wrong, but it basically rips off the same mechanic of Saints Row's Dubstep weapon, albeit it doesn't have the same satisfying effect because you die using it. I understand that the compromise there is, you know, you have overwhelming firepower for the sake of losing life, but when you're already up against it, and especially in that arena mode, when if you're against the boss and you die and you have to restart, you wouldn't run the risk of using it. So it seems like a weapon that maybe could have done with one of the other suggestions I have for this game, which is the upgrades to each weapon. That's one of the big carrots that this game offers you, is that when you open up the menu, you can go into the armory and you can see what weapons you're going to be using, or the outlines of them, and you can see the upgrades. You get to see how much bigger and more badass they get. Two problems with this, however. Number one, the upgrades really only apply aesthetically to the guns and in terms of the ammo capacity that they're able to hold. And fire, by the way. So, for instance, the shotgun, it goes from firing 3 shots to 6 shots to 8 shots to like 20 million shots. But it doesn't improve the damage, it doesn't improve the spread or the accuracy or the recoil, it doesn't add any effects, and it's the same with all the other guns. And that's a bit disappointing. In a game that seems to revel in its own silliness, why not make the upgrades crazier? Why not make the bullets tiny birds or small shards of candy canes or something? I don't know. Something like that. Grind up Rick Astley and put him in the shotgun for something. I don't know. Go crazy. Especially in a game that's based around a guy going to hell, but the hell is a fictionalized world that Disney would cream his pants seeing. Go crazy with the ambition here. And it's a bit disappointing when you get like I say, I assumed there might be some other upgrades, and it just turned out that, oh, I can fire 6 shots instead of just 3, which is useful, don't get me wrong, it's just, it lacks a little bit of that same imagination that I thought would carry through to every aspect of this game. And the other thing is that the guns that don't need ammo tend to be the weakest ones. So, for instance, the toaster. I didn't like the toaster at first because it's hard to aim. There's no reticule for the toaster, and whenever you throw it, you feel like you're always overshooting it. Even if you're pointing it near to the ground, you throw it and it seems to hurtle harmlessly over your enemies, exploding and occasionally taking some out. You have to be really close to your enemies when you use it for it to be anywhere near effective, or indeed flying through the air throwing it downwards for it to be any use, which kind of negates the point some of the time. But it is still a useful tool. I do like the arsenal of weapons, but I would have preferred, again, some upgrades that actually changed them up a little bit, or improved them, added areas of effect, or just something a little bit different. The other thing I would have added potentially, if you don't want to go down that route, is upgrades to the character. It sounds to me like, based on the quips of the protagonist, that he's got a character, he's got a personality, so why not boost it with some really cool aesthetics, boost it with, I don't know, some armor, some badass gauntlets or something along those lines, give him his own distinct personality and give him boosts. Boost to his defense, boost to his health, boost to his running speed, his stamina, things of that nature. I do want to talk about a thing the game does really, really well, which is the currency. They drop little gold coins when they die. Not all the time, not every enemy, but sort of sporadically, but not so little that you think it's cheap, but not so much as that they stop being coveted. Every time I saw a gold coin, I wanted to go after it and pick it up, because these gold coins are the things you're going to spend to upgrade your weapons. And you do need a lot. You need a lot. One of the first notes I wrote about the game when I started playing is that I felt it was too grindy. Now, in retrospect, having played through the game, and when you get to some of the levels where the coins are more abundant, actually I think it's pretty well balanced. And again, it is satisfying as all hell, killing a massive boss, running up and just bathing in all the coins that you've just collected. And it comes with a little satisfying Mario ding sound. See, I gave Data Defense crap for not having more of that. Just that little pat on the back to say, well done you collected a coin, now go on you. And in terms of other pick-me-ups, you don't get any other boosters like shields or anything like that, you just get ammo. The game does something very well in that it has ammo typed drops, so you can't just spam collecting, like if you, I know some games just allow you to pick up the ammo for the gun that you're holding. This one, not so much. You have to target which ammo that you pick up, and you can only carry a certain amount. And I like that. It's a nice little touch. They're disguised as presents because it's sweet. It's sweet in hell and that. Let's talk about the tutorial. Wait, what? The game has an actual tutorial? It's going to show me how it's played? like you. Yes, it actually has a tutorial mode. It's not just got a menu screen that says, here, the button's stupid, now you figure it out. It actually walks you through how it wants you to play the game, and I really appreciate that. It's a tiny little thing, and it takes up 30 seconds of a gameplay's time, but it changes the entire experience just knowing where everything is and how it's all supposed to work. Kudos for doing that. The game also has unlockables, but albeit they are the weapons that I mentioned, they're not all that hard to find. I managed to find them. Find them all, with the exception of one for the melee upgrade, which, again, you never use melee. Personally, I would have mapped one of the melee to the weapons, because then you would have used melee on a more frequent basis. So it's not the biggest miss in the world. So I didn't completely 100% all the weapons. I didn't also get all the unlocks, but there are unlocks for every single weapon, apart from the trumpet and the toaster and the buzzsaw. Let's talk about the sound design very quickly, because it's ace. The protagonist, Gorytale guy, quips a lot, Duke Nukem style. Some of his funny quips, just random ones like, "Don't text and drive." I was like, okay, I don't, but thanks for the reminder. My favorite bad one though, my favorite dad pun joke is, "What is this, Switzerland?"
Is this some kind of Switzerland?
Cause everything's made of sweets and Switzerland's a country and you can switch these one syllable. I don't care, I think that's funny as f***. The enemies too, they all have this over-the-top, high-pitched sound. "I love you, I want to be your friend," and things like that. It only serves to make them more terrifying. The fact that they've got these big, wide-eyed, they only ever grimace when you shoot them, but when you stop shooting them, they go right back to being happy and, "Oh, I like you, I want to be your friend," and there's hundreds of them. It does add to the terrifying factor. Albeit they all sound exactly the same. That would have been a nice touch to have different voices for different enemies, especially if you come across sort of the bigger enemies like, "Hey, I want to be your friend." Like, oh God, Barney's here and he's pissed.
Run away! Run away! Run away!
Let's also talk about the music of the game. Not the most diverse soundtrack in the world. What I will say is that goddamn theme music in the main menu is going to stay with you for years. It's this weird blend of Scooter and My Little Pony came together to churn out the theme tune for Kevin and Perry Go Large. It's just this very weird blend of cuddly cuteness and then hardcore trance. Back to Ibiza we go, only this time we're not on ecstasy blood, we're on speed. And the only exception to this is when you're in combat and indeed you come across enemies, it switches to this hardcore thrash metal tune to just get you amped up. Plus it also gives you a kind of a cheap reminder that if it's like, oh wait, so wait a minute, I don't see enemies. This means I must be about to be mobbed. This can't end well.
Oh my God!
And finally, let's talk about the controls of the game. They feel precise, they feel reasonable. You can tweak the speed of the mouse responsiveness in the main menu, which I did. I found that considering how accurate, especially the assault rifle is, you can pick off enemies reasonably easy from a distance, and that's probably the best tactic that I could advise you of in this game. And I didn't encounter much in the way of bugs and glitches. Occasionally I got stuck or caught on some of the maps. Occasionally enemies phase through solid objects that you think they shouldn't be able to pass, but then they do. But despite those things, I would actually say that this is one of the more reasonably stable games I've played. I never felt like the game was going to break. I never felt the game was going to just compile in on itself in a massive code and chaos. But the controls felt the way they needed to feel. You can cycle through weapons on your mouse pad. You can use the buttons to cycle through if that's easier for you. You can move laterally as any good first person does. Again, you have enemies that do demand that you look up and down. I didn't like this element so much because, again, the problem is that you have such little feeling in your movement and such little notice that you're not moving when you do get caught in something. It's very easy for you to kind of get pinned to the wall by all the enemies that are on the ground. So when you do see flying enemies, which there are by the way, I think they're giant bowls of spaghetti and rainbows, it looks pretty dope. But nevertheless, you can't really let yourself get distracted by those because not only can you outrun them more easily and do less, and they don't do as much damage, and they don't really yield much in the way of a reward, you're better off focusing your attention on the ground where you can see what's coming and what's coming at you. But overall, I really enjoyed this game. I can't really complain about anything in particular. The story missions will take you about 3 to 4 hours depending on how good you are at first-person shooters. Again, for its price point, it's reasonably priced. I think it's about where it needs to be. If it wanted to be a bit cheaper, I certainly wouldn't complain, but I don't think it's over expensive for what it is because, again, the concept is it's very novel, it's very fun, it's very well honed, albeit just lacking in a bit of polish. It's got plenty of replayability. Now that I've played through the story, I can play through it again to get the rest of the upgrades for the guns, or if I want to go back into the arena and beat the high scores, then you can do that. The benchmark set by some of the players is already insanely high, so it gives you something to aspire to knock that guy in his ass. And I will say that despite how Zerg Rush the characters are, and how many there are, and how limited some of the guns can be, it feels attainable. I certainly feel like I'm going to be the kind of player that's going to revisit this game in a couple of months' time to see how the leaderboard's progressing and thinking, right, let's have a crack at that title, shall we?
Bring it on!
And yes, the story's not going to be enough to capture the imagination of everybody, but I certainly welcomed it as a change of pace. And let me just summarize by just giving you my last thoughts. It's cheesy. It's an old school FPS, macho and nonsensical, but I really, really like it. It's Duke Nukem visits Thorpe Park. It's Solid Snake visits Legoland. It's Master Chief going to Crazy Golf. The absurdity mixed with the over-the-top violence isn't a new concept, but damn, it's fun. Jimmy Havoc would like this game. Go and check him out. He's a wrestler. He's got a t-shirt with unicorns' heads being ripped off. If you like the aesthetic of this game, you'll really like that t-shirt. Who would like this game? People that are fans of first-person shooters are probably not going to be overly amazed by it, but I would certainly give it a check out just because, again, I like the aesthetic, I like the novelty of it all. Even casual first-person shooters will probably like this, even though it can feel overwhelming at times. Again, just to give some context, the developer, who I contacted prior to my review, as I'm always want to do, said that the idea was to bring a very strong contrast between cuteness and killing things. They made it as part of a local competition, which they won, and they decided to go big and make a game about it. They always had a dark, black sense of humor, very sarcastic and dry, which obviously does come through in this game. They wanted to create a fast-paced, saturated experience with dark humor, and they hope that people take that away when they're playing the game. News for the future is that they're potentially going to be working on a Gorytale VR version of this game. Now, I'm not usually a big fan of VR. In fact, I'm not a big fan of anything to do with VR, to be perfectly honest with you. But this game, given the basis of its framework, it's a very simplistic looking game, but the premise is simple enough that I think this would translate really very well into a VR experience. The only couple of things I would ask are this: if you're going to expand, or indeed, as the game alludes to, a sequel comes out, you need to expand the roster of guns. You need to also expand on the character. I think he could be potentially more interesting than he is. I would also suggest changing the enemies up to give them more of their own distinctive flavour. Change their pace, their movement patterns, maybe make some of them bounce or give some of them the ability to fly through periods or teleport or something. Just change up the nature of the game, especially in those corridor sections. Maybe not in the arena modes. I can understand why you wouldn't want to make it too hard. But certainly in those corridors where you're mono-a-mono or just against a couple of them, it would make the gameplay more interesting. And finally, the only other thing I would suggest is maybe make a bit more detail in the backgrounds. Just make them look a little bit more interesting. The aesthetic is striking. It's certainly not going to conflate this game with anything else, but give it a little bit something extra. But would I recommend you go out and play this game? Absolutely I would. It's a great game, a great experience from a great developer who sounds like they're going to be supporting it going forward. And I really suggest to you that if you're looking for something that's a bit of a giggle, a bit of a laugh, and a bit of something different, then Gorytale is a really good game to check out. But what do you think? Gorytale. Have you played it? What do you think? Are you a fan of first-person shooters? Are you a fan of first-person shooters that take the mick? Or that go with different tangents and take the genre in different directions? Or do you like the more tightened, militaristic first-person shooter experience? If so, what are some of the best? What are some of your frames of reference for a good first-person shooter? Leave me your thoughts in the comment section below. In the meantime though, thank you very much for watching this edition of the Halcyon Show. Please like, share and subscribe, and check out some of the other content creators in the description below. They could all use like, share and subscribe themselves. Otherwise, if you want to go check me out on Twitter, I'm usually pasting games like this there, so you're more than welcome to check out what I'm going to be reviewing coming forward, or what I'm interested in reviewing, or getting your guys' feedback on games I've already reviewed, like hearing about that sort of thing. Also, feel free to go check me out on Defunct Games' channel. You've heard me plod on about that enough, so thank you very much for watching once again. I've been your host, Lauren Wisely. Follow me on Twitter, @LaurenWisely. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next edition of the Halcyon Show.